Just to be clear up front, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a longtime fan of the Pathologic series. In fact, the original game, for all of its issues, is my favorite game of all time. It resonates with me thematically and even culturally in a way few other games do. Because of that, my perspective is entirely biased. I'll try to be as objective as I reasonably can, but this is very much my own opinion. This is also why I didn't label this as a review. It feels like the wrong framework for what I'm trying to do. That is to say, if you enjoy any of the aspects I'm about to critique, just know that I don't think that you are wrong. Pathologic 3 is a complicated game to discuss. In a way, all Pathologic games are, largely because of how deliberately opaque they are. I'd even argue they're less traditional games and more like interactive art installations, so criticizing them on things like fun factor, for example, feels kind of pointless because that was never really the goal in the first place. Rest assured, there's little to no spoilers in this video with respect to the narrative. The story isn't what I have an issue with. If you want my opinion on it, it's as abstract and as engaging as it has always been. Maybe even the most straightforward story we've had up to date. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I leave up to you. I also don't have a problem with Icepick's decision to change the gameplay to better suit The Bachelor. Would I have preferred something closer to the old survival mechanics? Probably, but I'm fine with innovation as long as what replaces those systems doesn't strip away the tension and the immersion that defines the earlier games. And, well, therein lies the issue for me. The reason for why Pathologic 3 feels like a severe downgrade from 2 has less to do with the systems themselves, but the design philosophy behind their incorporation. Before, the mechanics tended to disappear into the world. You were still operating with meters, certainly. Hunger, thirst, exhaustion, infection levels, so on, but they all behave like facts of existence in this world. Not all that realistic in some cases, but they added immensely to the pressure and immersion. By comparison, Pathologic 3 feels more like a walking simulator with a bunch of esoteric mini-games layered on top. The investigation and the actual doctor work you do as the Neo is genuinely my favorite part, but then there's stuff like the time rewinding, the Psyche maintenance, the decree systems, and a few other subsystems I'll talk about in a minute. You're constantly optimizing actions and redoing segments until you get it right, in a sense, which makes the tension more about understanding rules than surviving the consequences. The first two games have elements of optimization as well, of course, unless you're playing it blind, but here I think we can all agree it's much more prominent. I'm not a huge fan of time rewindy stuff and time loops in general, which I imagine has a lot to do with it. And while Pathologic 3 does it better than others, it's still something that I don't particularly enjoy. Having to redo the same sequence of events over and over reframes the experience from being an experience and more like a puzzle that you need to solve. I should mention there is a way to permanently die in this game, but the resource you require to rewind your actions is so readily available that I never even came close to running out. At least that was the case in my playthrough. Compare that to the second game where every death is penalized in some way. You actually have to live with the consequences of your actions, which in itself naturally integrates into the central theme of cruelty. Broadly speaking, it just feels like more features were removed and added in the third game. You manage your psyche and your amalgam and that's about it, none of which feel particularly intuitive. Sure, you could argue that time in itself is also a resource, but since the game centers around time travel, it doesn't carry the same weight when you can just restart the day and undo almost anything. And then there's the town itself, which feels artificially segmented. It's not about the addition of fast travel necessarily, but how it's implemented. You jump between isolated districts, and loading transitions repeatedly pull you out of the experience, which further serves to kill the immersion. It's more pragmatic, I guess, but I don't think convenience is what we play these games for. The whole minigame aspect that I mentioned before is particularly noticeable in the infected areas. The way you deal with the dangers there, as well as the central threat, which I won't spoil, feels like you're suddenly playing one of those generic Unity horror games. Even if you somehow find it scary your first time around or second time around, you definitely won't by the fifth or sixth. This results in you learning to avoid these districts, not because they genuinely unnerve you, but because they're just annoying to deal with. Which you can freely do, by the way. I don't know if it's intended, but you can skip a lot of the dangerous areas by just going back through the way you came, deleting your route, and making a new one. It's almost like the developers themselves realize how tedious these sequences can be and build a workaround. Going back to the whole apathy mania system, in practice it mostly comes down to managing your mania. Apathy just makes you move really slow until the Neo gets depressed enough to, well... Mania, on the other hand, increases your movement speed unless you take it too far. Yes, it costs health, but it's usually not that hard to remedy. And I don't know if it's just me, but the way you maintain the balance between the two kind of starts to feel goofy after a while. I get how dialogue choices and drugs affect your mental state, that makes sense, but there's other interactables that technically make sense once or twice, but maybe at the start of the game, while the Neo is still feeling his way around, but after that it kind of gets absurd. Imagine you're trying to run away from something only to have to beeline it to the nearest dumpster so you can kick it, get stressed out and get a speed boost, because that's a real experience I had. Now, if everything up to this point has at least attempted to be objective, this next section is entirely down to my own taste. I think that the Pathologic series in general has actually regressed a bit in terms of art direction. And no, this isn't me saying that Pathologic 2 or 3 aren't visually impressive, they absolutely are. What I'm talking about has more to do with texture work, lighting and overall theming. Pathologic 1, while obviously dated, has such a strong and unusual presentation that it still feels unlike anything else. I don't even know how much of that was intentional, but whether it's the use of photorealistic textures, the harsher lighting, or just a stronger, less muted color palette, it gives the game a very specific identity. The more recent Pathologic games lean more into standard modern visual techniques. That's expected, of course, and on a technical level they're far more polished, but I can't shake the feeling that a certain artistic quality was lost in translation. Things feel more refined, but also safer and less bizarre. I'm going to show you two clips that I think might illustrate what I mean, and if you still think that the newer games look better, you're not wrong, but maybe even then you can at least see where I'm coming from. Let me know in the comments if you agree or not. Maybe it's just my nostalgia for early 2000s graphics or my autism. uh, there's no wrong answer here. At the end of the day, it's all just opinions, and I'd very much like to read yours. So in summary, should you play Pathologic 3? I still think so. It's still a very strong narrative experience, just not as strong as what came before it. That said, as an entry point into the series, it might actually be a pretty good place to start. It leans more into traditional psychological horror, and I could see it inspiring people to dig deeper and go back to the earlier games. As for me personally, I don't think that anything else will ever top the original, and that's fine. I'm still very interested to see what Icepick does next with the Changeling route. Hopefully it takes the best parts of Pathologic 2 and 3 and delivers a satisfying conclusion. When that day comes, it'll be a bittersweet moment for a lot of us, I imagine, but I'm still genuinely looking forward to it.
I can't see it yet, but I can feel it.
It's not even a trap. It's a grave. Subipsum funis sumus. Can't say I hold a soft spot for it.
I can see that. You're full of hate, Stuffed or not, it's breathing. I can hear it. It can be healed rather than killed.
You mean you won't become a killer? But you will! Mark my word, that's exactly what will happen. But I can avoid it.
No, we won't ever get along. I suggest we be on our way. The sooner the better.
Off we go then?
Let's go. The clock is ticking.